Welcome to Lee County Pod. This is Jack Campbell, your facilitator. Today, our guest is Suzanne Cleary, poet, writer, and visionary. Our host today is Pete Malignic.
Oh, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Jack, we're all set? We're all set. Okay, Suzanne, we've got our questions and we've got our odds and all of that. And let me first introduce my co-host, Jack Campbell. We're both in Hobbs, New Mexico. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, nice to meet you.
And we both have read your book religiously, as it well deserves to be read. I was thinking, Suzanne, of your poem, in your poem Reunion, and there's a passage in there as you further into the poem. You say the edge of the deep blue book rested lightly on the table as the walls of the room dissolved, I guess, for I saw the walls reassemble at the end of class, reassemble as the end of class bell rang. The deep blue book is Silence in the Snowy Fields.
Yes.
Yeah. Matter of fact, it's on the shelf and at home. My paperback has a blue cover to it. But yeah, I said, gee, what a nice sharp image there. And certainly you talk about inspiration for writing poetry, attentively listening there. And interesting too, because so much of the book, there's an emphasis on seeing. But my question to you is, from that, why do you write poetry?
Well, why I write is much easier to answer than when I write. I never know when I'm going to write, but I always know that when I'm starting to write a poem, I'm really just trying to record something. I want to describe something clearly enough that I'll be able to remember it because it seems to me something worth remembering.
Mm-hmm.
Then, if I'm lucky, that description will become a poem, but I'm mainly writing to record or remember. And related to that, I would say that I also write just to spend time thinking about something. It's easier for me to think with, say, a pen in my hand than it is to just kind of cross my arms and think. I like to think on paper. So writing a poem for me is often a way to just spend time with something that I feel is worth thinking about, or at least to me, if not to anyone else.
Interesting.
And actually, there's one more reason too that I write, and that's just to wake up. I think that might be the most important reason, but I listed it last. When I think of writing a poem, I think of how that makes me notice things that I generally in daily life don't notice that much. I think a lot of times I'm just kind of on autopilot and can't do that when you're in a poem.
No, and part of it has to do with remembering, but you had said spending time with a particular thought, right? Or that could be a memory too, but not necessarily always yeah, interesting. Yeah, that seems to take away any self-consciousness of I am writing a poem where I'm just thinking in words, feeling in words, if you will. Too.
Yeah, I like how you said that. Yeah.
Well, do any of your poems in the odds come from prompts did any of them come from prompts?
Yes, actually one, very directly. The poem that's called "I Go Back as I Am Today,"
Oh,
which is a poem that, as its title, um, has a prompt. And the prompt, I've been trying to find where I found that prompt, Peter, so I could tell you. I think it may have been in one of Dorianne Lux's craft books, but the poem prompt or assignment is to write a poem about going back to a place from your past as yourself right now. So it could be going back to a particular childhood, morning in childhood, or a day in college, and just go back to in that instant in time and
huh.
be there for yourself now. And that prompt is a prompt that I didn't intend to use. For many years, I wanted to write a poem about this real life incident that when I was in eighth grade, a boy in my English class committed suicide. And he did that the week after our class had been reading the Edward Arlington Robinson poem, Richard Cory, before he commits suicide. Or we learned that he's committed suicide. And memory for me that's most vivid is the Monday after that weekend when our classmate committed suicide. Our teacher told us why the student wasn't in class that day, and our teacher then questioned himself aloud as to whether he was wrong to have had us read that poem and discuss it. He didn't say outright, but he was wondering if maybe that was too much for our eighth grade selves to process, and he in some way was part of why our classmate. And I just will always remember my teacher sitting on the desk right in front of me. I sat in the front of the room, just saying this very quietly. And I never knew how to write that poem. I didn't know what the voice would be in the poem. I didn't know where the speaker would be standing to tell that poem or who would be the speaker. But when I saw the prompt, I go back as I am today, I thought maybe that's the door into the poem. And I began the poem with those words, I go back as I am today. And the poem just kind of unfolded for me, pretty much as it is. I mean, I worked on it. I had no idea how I was going to write that poem. So I didn't go looking for a prompt to respond to in that case. And I usually don't use prompts in that way. But yeah, that poem is a result of it.
It's interesting that it's a classroom poem in the same sense that the reunion is a classroom poem, but they're very different, but they both have to do with poems in the classroom back in the past, and that they I go back I'm sorry, reunion appears right immediately after I go back, and I remember I go back because that's where I got the title for my review that I wrote of the odds from that phrase, the bravery of doubt, is it? Yeah. What I titled my review, which I'm hoping to have published soon, of your book. Well, thanks. That's interesting. That's pretty much the only poem that came from a prompt in the odds.
At least the only one that I'm conscious of having come from a prompt. Yeah, it definitely is the only one that I could say did.
I have a question, Suzanne, about the next to last poem in the collection, Rodeo. I know Jack and I had talked about that poem, and Jack has actually helped me have a better appreciation of rodeo than I had when I first read it myself. But in that poem, you bring in disparate themes of ballet and opera. Also in Love Spoon, you bring in wood carving and embroidery. And again, I hear, let's see, what's in the, you brought in some, I say disparate themes of the Emily Dickinson poem in the Opera House in Italy, right, in Milan, is it? And again, I hear, that's what I mean by disparate themes. But my question is, do you find it challenging to blend different themes into one poem?
Yeah. Usually I'm challenged when I'm writing almost any poem. But I love your question because I think one of the things that does characterize my poetry is that very often in one poem, I will have 2 or 3 subjects that seem to have nothing to do with each other side by side. And then somehow in the process of writing the poem and finishing the poem, I try to make those very disparate subjects feel more connected or feed each other in some way or feed some other idea. So for me, when I look at the poem about, say, the Aaron Copland's ballet, you know,
Yeah.
and the call in sports program, 2 different radio programs that are playing while I'm driving my car and I'm listening to the radio. And sometimes I'm listening to rodeo, sometimes I'm listening to the sports program, and those subjects were actually literally there when I was driving, and I thought, oh, this is fun. I love this kind of juxtaposition.
Uh-huh.
And that made me want to write a poem just because of how strange those 2 things were placed side by side. I would say with the poem Love Spoon, which is a poem about just looking at this wooden spoon that's carved with like a mad jumble of images, folk images from like the North Atlantic, mostly Ireland. Um, those images were, a jumble, but I didn't create the jumble. It was there. But again, I said, oh, wow, I love a jumble. I love having things that don't seem to fit together be placed side by side. That always feels to me metaphorically very rich for how life works. We are, or at least I am, almost daily confronted, if not bombarded, with things that don't seem to go together. I'm doing one thing and something else happens. Maybe this shouldn't happen, but if my phone rang during this podcast, that would be one of those life situations where I'm on one track, but another track threatens to pull me off. Now, my phone is on silence. That won't happen, Peter. But I love this kind of almost random presentation of strangeness that just happens in life. That always gets my attention, and I always want to write about that if I can. Did that make sense?
What's interesting as you're saying is I'm thinking about you have some very moving lines in the CVS store poem. What is the title of it? I've read this book so carefully, I ought to know. I should be able to recite the poem.
Oh,
But where you talk about, think there's a lot of an emphasis on seeing in there. Oh, here it is. For the poet who writes to me while standing in line at CVS, and you mentioned some CVS images, and I have had I've got a little something on there, from my my dog bite. I've had trips to the pharmacy lately, but you say, I don't know, there's some really moving lines. Song is like a kernel of light inside of things steady. You phrases like that too, juxtaposed with the fluorescent light and the items for sale, in the marketplace. The sublime, along with the consumerism or something. I mean, that's a disparate thing right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Jack, did you want to say anything about rodeo or?
Well, what I found about rodeo and a number of your poems is that they often make me go looking for more information. If I'm not familiar, for example, with Aaron Copland, I wasn't familiar with his ballet rodeo. So I had to go looking for that information. It's like, oh, now I understand what you're getting at. Now I see, I have a full picture because I had to go out and look for something that I didn't know. And I think that quite a few of your pieces of your work accomplish that. I think the average reader is not as well informed as they should be. And if they're not willing to go out and look, then they miss out. What I found intriguing about rodeo is how everything was woven together and painted such a picture in my mind that it's like, once I understood how things were tied together, it's like, wow, that's cool.
Well, thank you for that. I love when, an observation ends with, wow, that's cool. That's good. And I do hope that, by the end of that poem and many poems that I've made, that I've somehow woven together, as you say, very different moments or things. But, I will say to you though, Peter, that I did research about Aaron Copland so that I could make sure that what I wrote about that particular piece of music was right. I didn't know what the first movement was. I didn't know which instruments were playing necessarily. And I love if what I'm writing makes my reader curious to learn more. Often when I'm writing, I make myself curious to learn more, or I even start writing because I am curious about something. Recently, I came across a quotation. Oh, and I hope I can remember it accurately. A quotation by Lucille Clifton. And somebody in an interview asked her if, she writes about what she knows. And her answer was, I don't write about what I know. I write about what I wonder. I love that. I don't write about what I know. I write about what I wonder. And when I'm writing, very often what I feel, not to put myself side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the great Lucille Clifton, but when I'm writing, I'm full of wonder. Ideally, I'm there ready to be surprised by something, and I would say, Peter, in terms of that poem, I was ready to be surprised by something that Copland did in his piece of music. I was ready to be surprised by how a sports call-in program that was like really raucous at one point, because these guys, these guys were arguing about some referee's call. And I thought, how does that argument somehow belong in my drive while I'm just thinking about nothing and feeling my mind drift backward to memory? How does that argument fit in? So I was ready to be, amazed at what I found.
Suzanne, I'm going to go out on a limb, but I'm going to qualify this statement. Right now, my favorite poem in the odds is Home for RK. I think that's, do I have the title right? I was just looking at it. Home for RK.
Mhm.
Yeah, I say right now because 6 months from now I could open the book and have a different favorite poem. But do you yourself have any favorite or favorites? The Beauty is one of my favorites. Life Class, the music. They're among my favorite. What about for yourself? I know they're all metaphorically your children, etc.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's see. I wanted to say, first of all, I hope that, you will think to open my book in 6 months. Right there, that's a wonderful compliment, right? And I will say to you that when I read a book of poetry, I don't read it cover to cover, and I don't read it quickly. Once in a while, that might happen, but usually I just live with a book for a while, and then I open it up, and I might read the same poem repeatedly until I decide I want to move on to another. So, I would love you to open up the book again in 6 months, and and discover another favorite maybe. For me, I would say that in the odds, my current favorite, I would say, is the poem called "Who Among Us." And I don't know if listeners to this podcast will know the poems that we're talking about, or have a text you know, presented so they can read the poem. But "Who Among Us" is a poem. Should I describe it to you, Peter? Who
Sure.
Among Us? Yeah. Okay. "Who Among Us" is a poem that I wrote after reading in a biography of the English painter John Constable a footnote. And I don't know why this footnote information was even in the book, but there's a footnote that tells the story of um, basically a bulldog sliding into water,
Oh,
and how that
yeah.
inspired a great piece of writing, a composition, musical composition. And I just thought, this footnote is so entertaining and so weird. And the dog was not hurt, incidentally. The dog came out of this slip into water perfectly fine. So that's happy. Um, I love the story. And I thought I would like to just record that story. And so I love that poem because I love the story it tells, but also, like, technically, I like the poem because at the end it speaks directly to the dog. It's the only place in the poem where this happens. At the end of the poem, this won't be a spoiler alert for your listeners, our listeners today. But at the end of the poem, I turn to the dog and I say, "Good boy, Dan. Good boy."
Good
Comes
boy,
out of
Dan. Good
nowhere.
boy. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
read it
comes out of
right
nowhere.
here.
There it
Would
is. That's truth.
would
Thank you.
you read that one for us, Suzanne?
Oh, I would be happy to read that for you. I think that's on page 66. Okay,
No.
here it is. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is called "Who Among Us." What the bulldog lacks in grace, it makes up for with lack of grace. Thick-set, low-slung little pig feet shuffling through wet red leaves beside the river as two men follow at some distance. Brothers, one talking and one nodding, all three of them swathed in the fog of early morning after a night of rain, the last drops still falling from the few leaves remaining. November is a hard month, swelling with darkness and chill. But October also was hard, despite purple coneflowers and goldenrod fizzing with bees. The one man slowly shakes his head and the other man nods, as if they are in a library or a streetcar or anywhere. while the dog noses the fragrant ground, waddles on, his one gnarled expression expressing nothing, even as his hind leg slips, and of course the other one follows. And then the dog is spinning on its stomach down the steep bank into the River Wye. Who among us has not fallen into the River Wye, or into its happier tributary, the Why Not? Who among us has not tensed at the first signs of the trajectory before giving in? Dan, this is the dog's name, Dan labors to breathe as he burbles in the shallow and then, as the record states, regains the shore. All of which can be heard in Edward Elgar's Enigma Variations, Opus 36, opening bars of Variation 2. Good boy, Dan. Good boy.
Bravo.
Thank you.
You know, I'm thinking too of poems so as different as I can't bring up the title right now, but poems as different as The Beauty about the snake. You know, I like that one. And the thought of putting a snake on the floorboard of your motor vehicle as you're taking it to a wilderness area, especially a snake that large. I mean, that's a brave soul. But the other one about your, well, the person in your poem, I should say, is watching a program about RVs, and I can relate to that. I forget the title of it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Oh, Is It Normal? That's the name of
That's
that.
it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so poems that are so different, and then the one about the guy with the baseball cards too, with his personal. You see, they're all they all have they're all as unique, as distinct as a person. That's what I like. That's what I don't know. That to me is what each poem ought to be unique. You know, we don't want to be parodying ourselves, and you certainly are don't do that at all, to my mind at least. I'm looking for my phone here. I've got my questions, and I have a question about the poem. Well, bumper sticker, Suzanne, seems directly about a person surviving or not surviving a bad circumstance. I know in bumper sticker, the daughter did survive. When did you know that The Odds was going to be your book's title? Because that's it, that poem, as some others, are directly about the odds.
That's right. Yeah, it's always been hard for me to come up with a title for my books. I mean, some people I think are much better at doing that than others, but for me, it's always been a struggle. So as I was putting together the manuscript that eventually became the book, The Odds, I was working, during the COVID pandemic.
Oh.
I also was writing as a person who's lived quite a long time. And, you know, age is a great thing for a poet to some extent. Okay, I'll qualify that to some extent. So I felt that, I was writing poems that were fairly obsessed with time and luck and uncertainty. And I happened to be working on one poem among many. I usually am writing several poems at one time. I was working on one poem that I have yet to finish, but the poem is titled "The Odds." And as I was working on that poem, I said, "Oh my gosh, this might be the title poem for my new book." And I was very excited because, for one thing, I had a title. That's always a struggle for me. So I said, oh, wow, I want to finish this poem because this is going to be the title poem. Well, I didn't finish that poem to my satisfaction, but I thought The Odds really fits with these poems because the poems are very much about the great uncertainty of life and luck good and bad, chance, and how do we live with that? And so I felt, okay, this book, whatever it ends up being, is going to be titled The Odds, because I know that title will work with virtually everything I'm producing right now.
Yeah, it certainly seems very relevant to the poems in the book. And the images in the poems in the odds, well, like the first one we talked about with the deep blue, I think you described it as the deep blue book at the edge of the desk or the table with the silence in the snowy fields. The images are very precise. You know, one example set in the CVS drugstore, the image of the sound of scissors on a ribbon. And I was just looking at it earlier. Where's the book is behind me right now, but in that you mentioned the light that shines from within the song. Interesting, the light that shines from within the song. And I'm thinking, okay, what is it? Synesthesia, where you mix the senses. That's it. Yeah. Could you, Suzanne, I hope this isn't too general a question. Could you talk about the importance of seeing? I mean, you know, in the various ways one can see, you know, in literature and life, I suppose, too. It just seems so relevant to the book.
You know, I think it's a great issue for you to raise, Peter, and I don't think it's too general. I think it's really crucial, at least to me as a writer, that sense detail be part of the poem. I know that whenever I remember a poem, not just one of my own poems or where it's come from, but when I remember somebody else's poem that I've read or I've heard them read, I remember it, first of all, because of the sense detail that's in that poem, especially imagery. If there's a strong image, that poem has permanently imprinted itself in my mind's eye, and that has immediately engaged me with the poem. Once I have that image, then I can respond to that image and to associations that arise from that image, and maybe the story that a poem tells, or its, you know, lyric meditation. But sense detail is so important for me in all poetry, not just in my own poems. I'll say that for me, usually my poems do begin with me just trying to describe something I've seen. It can also be to describe something I've heard or I've learned or I've read. But my first impulse to write is not to say, I'm going to write a good poem now. This is a great idea for a poem. For me, that would just absolutely immediately take all of the fun and the energy out of writing. What I want to do is I want to really set the bar lower in some way. I want to just record something and then see what it leads to. But imagery is, for me, one of the things I most love in poetry. I think, on one hand, I love to see the physical world in, you know, in its beauty and even its horror. I think that's, for me, the door into a poem, whether my own poem or somebody else's.
Yeah.
Did that address that issue enough, Pete? That
And
answer?
yes, it does. And I know you're very familiar with that Bly poem, driving into town. Is it, for some reason, I'm thinking it's a Sunday night. I don't remember exactly, but what I do remember is the image of the mailbox. I can hear, see, and feel that mailbox open as the letter is going into the slot. And I know you can too.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean, what an image, you know?
Yeah. if I could just jump in, it was really, it was really fun for me after I decided to post that poem one day on Facebook because
Yeah.
what I like most to do on Facebook is to post poems that I love. And I rarely post anything by myself, maybe if it's been like recently published somewhere. But I posted that poem from Robert Bly, and I said that that was the first poem I recall ever truly reading or truly loving.
Huh.
And so many people said just what you said. We remember that poem.
Okay, there we go. All right. So let's finish this up.
Okay, we're back up, Suzanne, and
Okay,
I see a lot of books in the background there. One could ask you about the importance of reading to writing, but um, we already assume that that's important. Um, we mentioned the image of the sound of scissors on a ribbon that's in the I call it the CBS poem.
so do I. It's a long title.
Looking for the title there, but
Standing in line at the CVS.
standing in line at the CBS. Okay.
For the poet who
in that
writes to
poem,
me while standing in
you
line at
mentioned
CVS
the
waiting.
light that shines from within the song. And I think where we left off, till the odds cut us off about the importance of seeing.
Yeah. She already pretty much answered
And
that.
right from your very first poem, Emergency Room is a poem of careful observations, I would say.
Yeah, I think of my poems as
Just
as
a
all yeah.
just a second. You may be muted here. Sir? Suzanne, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Mhm.
Okay, I can hear you now. Yeah, sorry. Okay, we're back.
So go ahead, re-ask your question.
In regard to seeing,
Yeah, in regard to seeing, you mentioned the first poem in the book, which is Emergency Room. It's about me being in an emergency room and being wheeled in a wheelchair past this room full of people who needed to see the doctors and apparently needed to see them quickly. And for me, I think of my poetry as being about people primarily. Once in a while, I will write about animals, but I don't see myself as a nature poet beyond writing about people and human nature. I'm interested in what people do and the stories they tell. I'm interested in history, and often all of that will give me images that I want to put on the page. And sometimes my poems will read like a list of images. But of course, I hope that they're more than that too. But yeah, I keep my eyes open, hoping that the world will give me a poem. I always tell my MFA students to train themselves to look for poems, not just by looking inside of themselves and kind of then giving the world poems, but to just keep their eyes open and let themselves kind of be a vessel for what the world wants to give them to write about. For me, that's, I think, one of the reasons that my poems are full of images. I try to keep my eyes open. I'm not good at that in my daily life, but when I'm writing, I try to be good about that.
you're probably just modest, or you're probably good at it in life as well. You know, it sounds too what I'm uh, understanding, what I'm seeing metaphorically is that it's very healthy not to be overly concerned with publication and notoriety necessarily, but that the act of making that commitment to words on paper, the act of shaping that into a poem is really the fundamental thing that we're source of satisfaction. That's what I wanted to say. Oh my God, is it going to get published in Poetry Magazine? Is it going to get published in, wherever? But did it give me satisfaction in writing? It seems to be the most important thing to you.
I would say that yes, that is the most important thing to me. And I do have behind me, my bookshelves, some of them, and these are the shelves that have poetry on them. And you could tell that by the mostly thin spines that you look at. And I wish that I could tell each poet whose book is on my shelf that I've read their work with great care and I really appreciated it. And that's why it's on my shelf. And that publication is something that I'm sure the poet prizes. And like me, they appreciate each reader. But I like to think that most serious poets understand what you just said so well, Peter, which is that being a poet is about engaging with the world or with yourself in language and trying to fashion something that has meaning and will move someone else. Publication is wonderful. And, I think that publishing isn't what makes you a poet. Publishing is what makes you a happy poet sometimes, but that doesn't last. As long, I know for me, one of my goals that I constantly pay mind to is that I need to keep myself in love with poetry in order to keep writing poetry. I hope to keep publishing it and from time to time, getting some recognition for what I do. But what really fuels me, fuels my energy as a poet, is to engage with this art form that I love. The way I work on a poem sometimes is just by sitting with a book that I love, not one of my own, by the way. I'm sitting with a book that I love and getting lost in it and reconnecting with what I felt when I was first reading, Robert Bly's Silence in the Snowy Fields. That book was such a wake-up call to me, not just to poetry, but to the possibility for how I could live in the world, that I could actually just by keeping my eyes open and my ears open, hear things that were worth seeing and hearing. And then I said, okay, let's try to record it. Robert Bly does that. Look at how powerful his apparently very simple poem is about driving into town to mail a letter. That poem must be so moving to many of us because it's such a good enactment of being alive in the moment. And I strive for that. Poetry helps me to do that. Publication doesn't help me to do that. An award doesn't help me to do that. But writing helps me. So, I love what you said.
Boy, I'm thinking here of our mutual friend Roy, and he lives in Ohio. And in writing an introduction for Roy's book, I found myself mentioning James Wright, with that Ohio link. And
Yeah.
when I think of Robert Bly, I often think of James Wright, knowing that they were friends and, might have met, when James Wright was living in Minnesota.
Oh, they did.
Too.
Yes.
Do you like James Wright, especially the early books?
I love James Wright's work. And I have always loved James Wright's work. And, you know, there's a wonderful biography of James Wright. Oh, I don't have it within, oh, I don't have it in here right now, but James Wright, yeah, is another one of those poets. He was a dear friend of Robert Bly, and he's another one of those poets who I would consider a core poet for me. When I was first writing poetry, I was very moved by, and still am moved by, the power of his simple language to convey profound, profound truth. I'll use the word truth for lack of a better word, about what it's like to be alive and to struggle to be alive in the moment, to struggle, in his case, with certain demons, with poverty, to have a heart for people who were struggling, and to write about that in a very direct way. I love James Wright's work. Always will.
Interesting to know. Jack, do you have some?
Yes, I have one question. Where can we find your book? What outlets are distributing it? For our listeners, where can they buy your book from?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. Probably the easiest way to buy my book would be to go to the New York Quarterly website, because New York Quarterly Books website, because New York Quarterly Books is my publisher, and there you'll find various links, including a link to Amazon, including a link to some small independent bookstores. Um, Bookstores will be able to access the book through a distributor called Asterism. And I'm now in the process of trying to figure out if that's actually set up yet so that they can buy the book, the odds. But I know that a lot of people have bought it already. I think from New York Quarterly Books, or maybe, you know, elsewhere.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think
Thank
that
you.
brings us to the end of our time, Pete.
Okay, Suzanne, sorry we had that little interruption there, but we got that fixed, and I'm sure it'll all be worked out,
We'll splice it together.
and we'll get the finished product to you soon. What a
Great.
pleasure it's been to see you virtually. I'd say in person, but it's been very rewarding.
Oh, well, thank you. I have loved being here in the Zoomosphere with both of you, and this has been really fun for me. I didn't exactly know what to expect from a podcast, but it's been really interesting, and I love the fact that you've spent time with my book, and I so appreciate that. I hope other people will want to read the odds, and you know, I hope I write some good poems to follow up this with another book.
Cool deal. Thank you so much for your time and your graciousness. This is Jack Campbell with the County Pod signing out. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.